From service to sick, men and women who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan are facing a battle here at home this afternoon. They're facing health problems.
Hundreds of thousands of vets, including many right here in our area, say they were exposed to fiery burn pits while they served overseas. NBC 10's Jim Rosenfield looks at just how burning trash on U.S. bases is creating toxic worries.
Burn pits were part of daily life for U.S. service members.
And so God only knows what is burning in there at this time.
Living on bases adjacent to the smoky garbage dumps. Home for almost 3 million troops deployed to the desert during 2 wars in the Middle East.
I mean, I've seen asbestos in the burn pits. I've seen fuel in the burn pits. I've seen ammunition in the burn pits.
Retired Army Lieutenant Dan Brewer was the guy charged with managing the environment at U.S. bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. Alarmed at the time by what he saw.
I did give recommendations that I did not think burn pits was a good solution. I wish I was told by a couple of people that, you know, this is Iraq, this is the U.S., we're here to, you know, kill the bad guys. I said, you know, we may be killing our own people long term.
I remember seeing the smoke.
Former Army National Guard police officer Cindy Amon of Hokessa served primarily on the Iraq border in the early 2000s.
The coughing and the blowing black stuff out of your nose.
Once Amon returned home to Delaware, new symptoms started to bother her.
There were these points in times I would just be so short of breath.
Amon says it got so bad she had to leave her job as a Wilmington police officer and launched a 2-year odyssey with VA doctors and outside specialists to figure out what was wrong.
The VA was telling me that it was anxiety, that they wanted to put me on different medications, and I was like, no, this is physical and we're going to figure this out.
Here we go.
Finally, she got permission to have a specialist in New York do a biopsy of a portion of her lung. It confirmed something called constrictive bronchiolitis, an incurable lung disease which attacks the small airways. It's rarely seen in otherwise healthy people, but is now showing up in some of the men and women who served in the Middle East wars.
Go walk with mommy.
Veterans advocates say Cindy Amon's fight for care and coverage illustrates the government's response to burn pits. Congress mandated that the VA create a burn pit registry in 2014, but veterans say it's not user-friendly. So far, more than 161,000 Iraq and Afghanistan vets have reported their symptoms on the voluntary registry, a fraction of the nearly 3 million who have served during those wars.
It's a case-by-case determination at this point.
The VA declined to speak with us about disability benefits regarding burn pits.
The patient breathes naturally.
But we did get to visit doctors seeing patients complaining of symptoms at the VA's War-Related Illness and Injury Study Center in East Orange, New Jersey.
Is it safe to say that exposure to these burn pits was not a good thing for these service members?
I think absolutely. You know, you don't need to be here at a center of excellence to say that.
Is it making them sick?
It might be.
Yeah.
In some people, it might be making them sick. I think, who is it making sick? How many people is it making sick? And what is the sick? What is the sickness? Those are still questions that we don't have good answers for.
At this point, the VA and the Department of Defense are not ready to place all the blame on the pits.
Was it the burn pit smoke? Was it the ambient air pollution? For some people, was it a blast exposure? We don't know.
Cindy Amon received benefits based on her burn pit exposure. Now she's fighting for other veterans.
They keep saying they need to do more and more and more research. And I'm like, but you've researched this to death, you know, and you're going to keep going in circles. We've come to that point. Now it's time to help the veterans.
The VA says as of August, more than 9,600 vets have submitted claims for illnesses they blame on burn pits. Less than a quarter had those claims granted. The Department of Defense declined to speak with us for this story, but in a statement said, quote, when used, open-air burn pits are to be operated in a manner that prevents or minimizes risks to human health and safety of DoD personnel and, where possible, harm to the environment, end quote. And these days, the U.S. military has largely phased out use of these burn pits when possible. They use incinerators, but that's a costly alternative.
Wow, so important to get that awareness out there, especially when you look at the numbers and see a small percentage of those claims are granted.
Could be affecting millions of veterans from those wars.
Now to an issue affecting U.S. veterans of wars in the Middle East deserts. We're talking about burn pits. They were used on hundreds of military bases across Iraq and Afghanistan.
Now some veterans say this way of getting rid of garbage made them sick. NBC 10's Jim Rosenfield has the push to make the government recognize what some call this generation's Agent Orange.
This is our burn pit.
Ryan Conklin sums it up pretty well.
Pretty much everything we have that we have to get rid of, we burn.
From bottles to wires to boxes.
And so God only knows what is burning in there at this time. And of course we breathe it in.
This is how the U.S. military was getting rid of trash in the Iraq and Afghan wars.
Anything and everything burns.
The one on Conklin's 2009 base was small compared to some others.
Hold on.
Now back home, the Lancaster firefighter is concerned about his health. He's seen other vets experience illnesses they blame on burn pit smoke.
Every time that burn, you got a good wind and you're just kind of living in this cloud.
So Conklin and others are fighting the people they once fought for. They want the U.S. government to recognize the dangers burn pits posed and do more about it.
What goes through my mind is, what am I going to find out about 40 years from now?
Melissa Bryant is with the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Association. Her group is pushing legislation in Congress, the Burn Pits Accountability Act. It would establish Department of Defense accountability to track and share information about service members' potential burn pit exposure before they leave the military.
Never before has the Department of Defense looked to be accountable for the toxic exposures that we face.
In fact, the DoD this spring skipped a congressional hearing on burn pits and hasn't shown up on Capitol Hill for burn pit roundtable discussions. And they aren't speaking with NBC 10 either. Reps have declined to set up interviews. In a statement, the department tells us in part, when used, open-air burn pits are to be operated in a manner that prevents or minimizes risks to human health and safety of DoD personnel and, where possible, harm to the environment.
We definitely see an association. There is definitely a signal between deployment and having a lung problem, a symptom related to the heart or lungs.
For its part, the VA isn't willing to only point the finger at burn pits.
I think the question remains, what is the range of those problems, and more exactly, what was it about the deployment? Was it the burn pit smoke? Was it the ambient air pollution? For some people, was it a blast exposure? We don't know, and I think we're still trying to pin that down.
But advocates tell us they want more done now before more vets get sick or die.
We're already 17 years into this, so something's got to give.
Now, 4 years ago, Congress did mandate the VA create a burn pit registry to help document exposure, and more than 161,000 veterans have now signed up. But that is still a fraction of the almost 3 million possibly exposed to the burn pits. More recently this fall, the president signed a bill that would create a VA Center of Excellence to study burn pits and treat exposed veterans. But right now it's unclear where that center would be located or, guys, how it would be funded. Advocates say it's admirable, but it's just not enough.
Wow.
Tonight at 11, billowing smoke surrounding military bases.
And it was always burning, always black smoke coming out of there.
The garbage had to go somewhere.
Anything and everything burned in a burn pit.
Now our veterans say they're feeling the consequences.
There's metal in the lungs of these soldiers.
Military members are fighting for their lives, but it's not because of bullets and bombs.
Yeah, some say the toxic air that surrounded them on their own bases has now made them sick. But one doctor is using particles from the war zone in an attempt to treat our veterans.
At a Long Island hospital.
This is very fine.
Inside a sterile lab.
Small enough to breathe in.
A precious vial of dust full of clues.
There are metals in it, and we found burned particles in it. This sample came from Camp Victory, Iraq in 2007.
Dr. Anthony Sema works on a treatment for soldiers exposed to these. It's no secret burn pits were part of daily life for U.S. service members stationed in the Middle East. They are how the military disposed of its trash. Everything from water bottles, metals, and medical waste.
It all burns in there the same.
The problem is, even if you say we're only burning plastic water bottles, if you have 100,000 troops and everybody's using 4 plastic water bottles a day, you're releasing carcinogens and chemicals which are harmful to the lung.
I remember seeing the smoke.
Former military police officer Cindy Amon served on the border of Iraq 15 years ago. Now back home in Hockessin, more than a decade later, Amon suffers from an incurable lung disease called constrictive bronchiolitis, which she blames on her days in the desert.
Here we go.
Diagnosis made thanks in part to the work of Dr. Seema. He's working on a treatment for constrictive bronchiolitis.
This is a mouse lung that inhaled dust from Iraq.
Dr. Seema's team determined the lab animals given the burn pit dust developed lung damage that mimicked veterans' lung problems, the inflamed airways lacking protection from some of the body's immune cells, the same cells found in a hormone contained in breast milk.
We think this is a major breakthrough.
The breakthrough led to limited testing of a potential new drug that could one day cure people like Cindy Amon. It's the type of breakthrough Cindy insists the VA and Department of Defense have been too slow to embrace.
They are saying it's, the new Agent Orange, obviously. Well, that frustrates me because Agent Orange took 35 years to have recognition, and here I'm not waiting 35 years. We have veterans that are too sick to wait for 35 years. That's not fair.
Agent Orange, of course, the herbicide linked to cancer, was used during the Vietnam War. These younger vets also worry about cancers from the burn pit dust, but no link so far has been made. A lot of worries and concerns, though.
Yes, understandably. So are these veterans getting health coverage from the VA for these lung problems?
So in Cindy's case, the VA did cover her illness, but the agency says those kinds of decisions are made on a case-by-case basis. VA tells us it is researching the effects of these burn pits. We also, by the way, wanted to talk to the Department of Defense about burn pits, but they declined our request for an interview. The doctor you saw there, Dr. Seema, he's applied for funding from the Defense Department for further studies, and he one day hopes to get approval for the drug down the road from the FDA.
That breakthrough would be remarkable and would help so many people, and no one wants to wait 35 years for that.
Certainly not.